Okay, apologies for those of you who are expecting the Muay Thai episode. It has been written. The first part has been edited and ready for recording. However, I could not miss this opportunity, and I've re-recorded the first part of The Way of the Shark. It was a podcast that needed re-recording due to the poor sound quality of the original show. It's got minimal changes to the text, but it has got music over the top of it. So hopefully, it's a more enjoyable listening experience. That's what will follow. And my reason for doing that is I couldn't miss the opportunity to re-release it in July, my birth month, and a central plot point to the movie Jaws, the 50th anniversary of Steven Spielberg's blockbuster film, the original summer blockbuster, Jaws. Now, I first encountered Jaws in 1981 when it premiered on British television for the first time. Back then, we still had three channels. We're about to have a fourth channel, but we only had three channels. That's all we had. I didn't even have a video recorder at that point. That was what we were given. But there was so much talk about Jaws on the show. I wasn't quite at school at that particular point. We were touring on the circus, and I used to go to various different schools when we used to travel around. But I think I remember it was the next year when Jaws was shown again that everybody was talking about it at school and still really excited about it. And then Jaws 2 came out as well. I remember that being being a big part of the advertising. I remember the TV Times a media guide that we used to get with the picture of the water skier and the shark behind her for the advertising of Jaws 2. And I remember watching that, and my cousin recorded it, and we rewatched it several times. But the original Jaws, back in 1981, I was way too young to watch it and unminded, but busy show, busy parents, it was PG. Back here, it's 12 now, according to my DVD. So I watched it, and I remember the Hooper shark cage scene. I remember Quint's death, and I remember the opening scene with Chrissy Watkins and how visceral that was. So, are there martial arts self-protection references in Jaws? At a stretch, yes. Andy Gibney, who's been on the show a couple of times, has a Jaws poster proudly displayed in his full-time gym. I'm sure Andy could have a fantastic conversation with me on this show. Maybe we will do in the future about Jaws and connections between Jaws and training and life and martial arts. However, time's scarce, and I wanted to get this out, so it's just me. And the martial arts reference in the actual Jaws film is, which is not in the novel, of course, is the karate school. There's some wayward kids from the karate school breaking down a white fence, and the report comes into the new chief of police, Brody, who is our viewpoint as a member of the audience. And the main protagonist, obviously, alongside Hooper and Quint, but he's the guy that we're supposed to have the most empathy with. He's our audience's perspective, if you like, and so he's dealing with all these trivial things that are coming in, and apparently the karate school needs a good talking to because their students are practicing their skills out on fences. Be interested to hear back from my karateka listeners what they think about karate's representation in Jaws. We can find other things though in Jaws that are connected to martial arts and self-protection. Obviously, the making of Jaws was a notoriously troubled shoot that has been brought to the stage in the form of The Shark is Broken, which I have yet to see. I'm dying to watch it, but I haven't seen it yet. I haven't had the chance to see it yet. With Ian Shaw playing the part of his father, and it's all about being on the set of Jaws and all the problems. And there's been several documentaries that talk about Steven Spielberg's debut blockbuster movie, the original summer blockbuster, which he said was one of his greatest experiences, but one of his worst experiences in filming. In fact, the superstitions from the filming of Jaws that Spielberg has carried on to the production of other movies that he's helmed. The struggles of overcoming adversity, the adaptation. I mean, the many adaptations within Jaws that come from the limitations that are there. And I've always been a fan of of what restriction can do for you. I think restriction breeds creativity. I really do. I find that I'm at my most creative when I've got restrictions, when I've got plenty of things to play with, and I've got a huge area to work with. I start finding that my imagination, it starts getting reduced. But when I find that I'm restricted, then I'm forced to be more creative, and that couldn't be better. Validated through the production of Jaws, because the special effects were limited, because the shark was broken often. The shark was notoriously, the shark models, the animatronic, called, named Bruce, broke, because of those issues. So much more had to be done, using John Williams' iconic score. Again, a score that Steven Spielberg notoriously laughed at when he first heard, because it was so simple, and yet now we know it's iconic, and it's because it works, because it's so primal. How much that we've seen through the shark's jaws. I mean, when you ever see those viewpoints of the shark under the water, you're not actually looking through the shark's eyes, you're looking through the shark's jaws. How do I know that? Well, I listened to a podcast called The Jaws Obsession, which is written by the author of the Book of Quint, which the Benchley estate has approved as a prequel to Jaws. But it's Jaws the movie, not Jaws the novel. Incidentally, Jaws the novel, well worth a read. It is Pulp Fiction. It's don't kid yourself. This isn't A Farewell to Arms. This isn't Angela Carter. This isn't Kafka. It is straight Pulp Fiction, but it's a proper page turner. Is the film better than the novel? Absolutely. And the choices that Spielberg made have made for a much better film. But also all the other people that were involved there, the writers. Carl Gottlieb, Robert Shaw himself, especially in the famous speech that he gives about the sinking of the Indianapolis. All of that, has contributed to be making a much better piece of art than the actual novel. But the original novel is well worth a read. It is brilliant, and in fact, I pay homage to it at the beginning of The Way of the Shark. So anyway, so certainly in challenges and overcoming adversity, we can see that in adaptations in martial arts. We're constantly having to adapt. Whenever we adapt in martial arts, it makes our training better. Restrictive training methods can make us isolate and improve on particular techniques, but also it helps us understand how to adapt in stressful situations, because guaranteed a self-protection situation, a self-defense situation, going to be physical, is going to need adaptation. You're going to be working from a position of compromise in some shape or form. So all of that comes out of it, if I can use it as a parallel. But of course, in the story of Jaws, in the film Jaws, it's all about fear, and fear management is a huge part of martial arts training, but also and self-protection too. So the unknown. What lies beneath, etc. What lies beneath us, what lies within us. I mean, again, there's so much of that is within Jaws that works as a metaphor through the perils of man versus nature, if you like. Anyway, that's enough of this extended intro. Again, please feedback, discussion points. I'll probably be putting some more in on the next intro as well when I re-record the second part. I hope you enjoy it. Please let me know, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.
Before the existence of written records, humans systematized combat. From prehistory and into the modern day, martial arts have been a part of the fabric of culture and civilization. Whether as a means of self-protection, or to wage war, or to compete, or to preserve a tradition, or to touch personal greatness, these codified methods push us to ask questions, to explore, to express, to test, and to tell stories. This is Jamie Club's podcast, the official podcast of Club Chimera Martial Art, where we take the path of the vagabond warrior to find knowledge and inspiration from people, events, and ideas. If you are interested in where to follow Jamie Club and Club Chimera products and services, please wait until the end of the show. In the meantime, if you think this product is worth the price of a cup of coffee, please click on Support the Show in this episode's show notes.
The great grappling art moves strategically through Brazil towards North America, propelled by ambition and a drive to be successful. The schools were just accessible enough to permit a rush of middle-class students in South America and a select few Hollywood celebrities in California. There was minimal movement, other than to draw attention through combative efficiency in challenge fights, reinforcing the art's precept, a message that would be widely disseminated throughout the martial arts subculture 7 decades after the system had become an offshoot of Kano Jigaro's Judo. To be exact, Kano's Judo filtered through the catch-as-catch-can wrestling booths of the early 20th century. By the 1980s, the martial art might have been any other combative system in the Americas that had been spawned by the Orientalist awe of the 1960s New Age movement or the 1970s Kung Fu boom, save for the genuine intention born out of its earliest days of promotion to prove itself by engaging in unarmed duels. The uninitiated fighters looked at the no-holds-barred arena. "Should we do some grappling training?" asked one. The others giggle. "What's to know? Hit him hard enough and he won't be able to grapple you. I cannot see much benefit in rolling around on the ground with someone. That's something we used to do as kids in the playground." Another group shakes their heads. "How dare they challenge us?" One martial artist stepped forward. "Let's fight then. Shut their stupid mouths. Take their heads off." The rest disagreed. "Our art is too deadly to be used in such challenge fights. Now hold still whilst I practice my technique on you." Eventually, the naive martial arts fighters enter the arena. They turn to their colleagues for support. "Now how about that fight?" they ask. "You go ahead. We'll wait here by the ringside." A fighter moved towards his unusually crouched opponent in a contrasting high stance. At first, his movements were graceful, but as he neared the fight zone, he faltered. The opponent moved towards the center of the arena. He raised his arms to prompt the fighter to instinctively do the same, as if they were to trade punches. The fighter's stance was narrow. The opponent recognized prey. In the November 1994 edition of Black Belt magazine, Carlos Machado was first quoted by David Mayer with the following predeterminist philosophy on his approach to fighting. Quote, "After the clinch, it doesn't matter what happens. One way or another, we're going to hit the ground, and we'll be in my world. The ground is my ocean. I'm the shark, and most people don't even know how to swim." End quote. This article had been published 1 year after a world event had caused shockwaves through the martial arts community. The Ultimate Fighting Championship was billed and marketed as a controversial no-holds-barred martial arts tournament to finally decide the world's most effective fighting style. Different representatives from different martial arts disciplines stepped into an appropriately theatrical cage to engage in a consensual unarmed duel. The tournament boasted no judges and no weight classes. Otherwise, there would only be 3 rules: no bites, no eye gouges, and no groin shots, each of which would be penalised with a $1,500 fine. Fights were to be won via submission, knockout, or corner stoppage. Rumours circulated in both media and amongst the fighters themselves that this would be the closest thing to a legalised death match. The results of the fight event spoke to the primal fears of many martial artists and fans alike. The metaphorical bubble was beginning to burst. Athletes supposedly championing their respective art striking prowess were diminished to what many would consider to be little more than infantile brawls. The bouts looked ugly and messy. With the exception of sumo wrestler Tiili Tuli, all those with strike-based backgrounds were defeated by grapplers. Striker-on-striker fights became slugfests that would contribute towards the early UFC's reputation as a human cockfight and the stigma mixed martial arts even faces today. Kickboxer and boxer Kevin Rosier smashed the asthmatic Kempo kickboxer Zane Frazier to the mat and then, while supporting himself on the cage, began stomping on the back of his head before the corner threw in the towel. Rosier would then suffer a similar fate in his next fight against Gerard Gordeau, the Savat and Kyokushin karateka who had kicked the tooth out of the mouth of the downed Tuli in the opening bout. This time Gordeau would deliver stomps that downed Rosier's ribs before his corner stopped the bout. By comparison, the grapplers took their opponents to the ground and finished them with clean submissions. Royce Gracie, representing Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, emerged as the champion with the family's specialised art of ground fighting. By the time the black belt article had been published, there had been a second UFC. This time, there was double the number of fighters and viewers were provided with the same story. The grapplers prevailed throughout the competition, with all bar one of the strike-based fighters winning against their fellow strikers with grappling submissions or strikes administered on the ground. Royce Gracie emerged as the champion again, and he was ready for the next one that would follow before the year was out. This time, neither he nor his intended opponent Ken Shamrock made it to the final. Both won their matches, but Royce was pulled out of the rest of the tournament by his family due to hypoglycemia and extreme fatigue. Shamrock, whose motivation for competing again came from wishing to fight Gracie in a rematch, withdrew from the final bout. Shamrock's own martial arts background was also grappling based. Ground fighting has long been regarded with disdain by the larger martial arts community. When Greco-Roman wrestling emerged in the mid-19th century, it was met with contempt by several British martial artists. Having been founded in France, one might assume a certain degree of prejudice in England, especially at the time of its emergence when the Napoleonic Wars were a relatively recent memory. Similar Francophobia can be seen by the British and particularly English aversion to kicking that very possibly stems from a reaction to the French martial art of savate. British late 18th century and 19th century bare-knuckle boxing allowed wrestling holds above the waist and takedowns in a similar fashion to Greco-Roman wrestling. However, it notably prohibited both kicking and ground fighting. The ground grappling side of Greco-Roman wrestling was considered to be decidedly un-English by Walter Armstrong, author of Wrestling Styles and Systems, in 1891, and, quote-unquote, a kind of dogfight on the ground. English boxing coach Andrew Newton echoed Armstrong's sentiments regarding its un-Englishness. Both men believed it undermined the national sense of fair play, which carried over into the belief that even in a self-defense fight, one should allow an enemy to get up after being down. Although catch-as-catch-can wrestling did gain a certain degree of notoriety as a professional sport in Britain and toured alongside boxing booths on circuses and fairgrounds, by the 1920s this began evolving into the stage spectacle that we now know as pro wrestling, or wrestling. The form of entertainment art largely emphasised the stand-up side of grappling, keeping the ground for rest holds and for the all-important drama of the pin. Even Kano Jigaro was apparently not a fan of the ground fighting element in his judo, known as Newaza, seeing the real art being in the throws. Modern judo certainly reflects this particular part of his vision, if nothing else. For all of Kano's desire to modernise jiu-jitsu through his art, fully embracing the Budo philosophy, there was still something of the battlefield samurai at the core of the system that had little interest in ground fighting. Kano saw groundwork to be too easy, and also somewhat shared Armstrong and Newton's view on its unaesthetic appeal. According to the biography The Way of Judo, a portrait of Jigoro Kano and his students, Kano felt that ground fighting was undignified and that it quickly, quote-unquote, degenerated into an unseemly schoolyard brawl. He also deemed it as less safe than stand-up grappling and was not suited for dealing with more than one opponent. These are all points worth revisiting in the podcast, as they will be reused in many arguments regarding ground fighting's legitimacy. However, Kano begrudgingly kept the pins, the submissions and even fighting from the back, which was fairly peculiar even within submission grappling styles when he conceded its combat efficiency. Much like the Gracies that would follow him, Kano staked a lot on live practice, or randori, and earned his school's reputation by having his students defeat rival martial artists. In Kano's case, this wasn't a broad spectrum of styles, but rather representatives of the old guard traditional jiu-jitsu. However, understanding how often grappling bouts would end up on the ground and how unambiguously they could be won that way, he wasn't going to give up an area that maintained his school's fighting legitimacy. For the best part of the 20th century, it would appear that Brazil was the only country that celebrated ground fighting via the televised Vale Tudo fights. When the Gracies weren't successfully defeating most opponents from other clubs in their schools and in the ring, they were taking challenge matches on the beaches. Is it any surprise that the uniform of the no-gi or submission grappler has its basis in rash guards and board shorts? Surfing was a big part of the Gracie family's youth culture, and this culture has often had its own tribes where rivalries spill over into fights. The beaches, like the matted area of many a training hall, present an environment that favours the master of the ground fighting. The no-gi submission grappling side of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu possibly forged through the many bouts held during the Gracie's feud with Brazil's other popular grappling style, luta livre. Despite strong representation from Marco Ruas, who won UFC 7, the art has yet to come close to the popularity of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Whereas Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu owes its direct origin to Count Koma Maeda Mitsuyuyo's teaching of Kano's Jigoro's Kodokan Judo, luta livre was developed from Euclides Hatem's development of British catch-as-catch-can wrestling. Catch-as-catch-can was probably a fusion of British folk wrestling and jiu-jitsu in the middle to late 19th century. Hatem, like the Gracies, was a respected fighter who fought challenge matches in both submission grappling and Vale Tudo rule sets. This was where he and his students would clash with the Gracies. We cannot understate the cultural influence of the way catch wrestling and judo, jiu-jitsu, was first promoted in Britain and both North and South America. Looking back, both having a special cultural connection to me I've never really considered. My family were both travelling circus people and travelling fair people or showmen. Boxing and wrestling booths were a common mainstay of both circuses and fairs during the 19th century and up to the middle of the 20th century. During these era, fairs and circuses were pretty much one and the same, and music halls were also fairly interchangeable, all of them boasting many of the same artists and promoters. Japan's earliest promoters of jiu-jitsu gave demonstrations and actively participated in challenge matches in these settings. This is where they helped grow their reputations. Patrons were offered cash prize incentives to either pin or submit the show's star grapplers, or to just last for a set length of time without being beaten. It was this background that saw catch wrestling eventually become the staged professional wrestling we know today, following Ed Strangler Lewis's throwing of his World Heavyweight Championship defense. It was also on a touring circus in Brazil, known as the American Circus, that Carlos Gracie Sr.'s father co-owned, that we saw Maeda and his students fighting in challenge matches to promote Kano's Judo, then generally referred to as Jiu-Jitsu. Maeda specialised in the Newaza or ground fighting style of the art. Quite possibly, much like catch wrestlers and Kano's other students who were fighting their own challenge matches in Japan, Maeda had worked out that taking the average challenger to the ground and finishing them decisively there with a submission was an expedient method. However, as we've seen, ground fighting was generally disrespected by fighters and the general public alike. It was less aesthetically pleasing to a lay audience and appeared unsophisticated to martial artists, both of which associated with the way they had seen animals fight or the way school fights often ended up. This disrespect and disregard allowed it to become the best secret weapon for challenge fight grapplers. As various martial artists gained support and sensationalism for their striking techniques or throws, in the background there was an innate primal fear that all these aesthetically pleasing strikes could be muffled and that everything would default back to literally scrapping in the dirt. Such a concern was given academic support in 1977 when the world-respected ethologist Desmond Morris wrote his book Man Watching. In his chapter on fighting, Morris stated that unarmed fights are rare and contrast considerably with the stylized scenes in movies, often consisting of a fast series of strikes from an attacker to a victim who either backs away, covers their body, or attempts to grab in order to convert the fight into a grappling contest. Morris said that these grappling contests often end up on the ground. Such assertions would become the basis for what would be preached by a new generation of martial artists 2 decades later. A 1988 review of the LAPD use of force incidents apparently revealed that 90% of fights end up on the ground. This became a common line used to sell grappling and ground fighting books, videos and lessons. In 1989, Horian Gracie, son of Elio Gracie, Carlos Gracie's younger brother, appeared in Playboy magazine discussing something called the Gracie Challenge. Ever since the earliest days of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu marketing, Carlos Gracie had placed an advert in Brazil's largest newspaper stating, quote, "If you want a broken arm or rib, contact this number," end quote, leveraging cultural machismo to legitimize his fighting art. This challenge was an extension of what had been occurring in the circuses, fairs and music halls, now brought to the training hall and anyone else's training hall or backyard. The challenge, migrated to Brazilian television in the 1950s and 60s as Vale Tudo, saw cross-style virtual no-holds-barred professional contests occurring on a regular basis. This remained a powerful marketing tool for the Gracies. Horian had started again at the bottom when he travelled up to South California, getting extra work in movies and recruiting students to his garage dojo. Eventually, one of his students set up a challenge match between Horian and famed American kickboxer Benny the Jet Ucarez. The story goes that Ucarez asked Horian if they were going to fight on the mats or on the hard floor, to which Horian confidently quipped, "Well, that depends. Do you want to be thrown on the mats or on the hard floor?" Apparently, Ucarez was very impressed with Horian after being submitted several times. However, despite much talk, neither partnered to better promote Horian's jiu-jitsu nor engaged in a professional rematch. It now appears that this story is an urban legend connected to the Gracie Challenge that was circulated a lot. There is no evidence to suggest that Horian Gracie even sparred with Benny the Jet Ucarez, let alone tap him. I mean, who cares if he did? All credit to Benny the Jet for engaging in that sense, and I don't think there's any history at all of Benny the Jet ever ducking a fight. But the two of them couldn't agree on the rules. They were going to have a potential challenge match, a $100,000 wager set for that, but it all fell through. They couldn't agree on what was going to happen there, and matters moved on. But it's an interesting piece of later investigation into the story, a story that has grown legs over time. But no, there's nothing to say that either of the two actually did face each other. This did not deter Horian, who was one of the main fight choreographers involved with Lethal Weapon's climactic unarmed duel, which ends with a triangle choke. With more challenge matches and Horian's other brothers joining him in the USA to simultaneously uphold the Gracie honour and promote the brand, word began to spread in the hugely influential Californian state. A Gracie school went under construction, with even father Elio being involved. Elio had quickly taken on the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu mantle after his older brother Carlos retired and been a big proponent of the martial arts David and Goliath appeal. Elio, who was smaller than Carlos and most of his students, had made a lot of adaptations to the art. Like Kano before him, he argued that small and clever could defeat larger and stronger. The ground, he argued, made size less important than the other ranges. Elio had become the family champion and fought in several significant Vale Tudo matches during Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu's formative years. Horian students included various individuals involved in the film industry, which further impressed advertiser Art Davey, who had considered using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to promote a certain brand of beer after he read the Playboy article. Soon he was promoting a documentary called Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in Action, which collected together footage of the Gracie Challenge, pushing the argument that their style could beat all other martial arts. All this excitement really was somewhat under the radar as far as mainstream martial arts were concerned. Martial arts subculture has always operated in many bubbles, often oblivious to what is going on around their schools and associations. I was no different at the time. Besides reading a single review in the UK's combat magazine entitled Greasy Shushitsu that mocked the Brazilian accent of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu teachers, I had little awareness of the martial art prior to the first Ultimate Fighting Championship. I recalled picking up a copy of Terry O'Neill's lavish publication Fighting Arts to read about this remarkable event. The story spoke to the same worries and concerns in me that I spoke about earlier. With the exception of the publicity photographs and a few pictures of fighters squaring off, the action shots depicted what looked like combatants brawling on the ground. Julia Tuli was criticised for demonstrating a lack of ground fighting knowledge by placing both of his hands on the mat and got kicked in the face. I read about an odd sounding technique called a shin lock. This was actually Ken Shamrock's ankle lock submission of Pat Smith. For all the different styles being represented, I read nothing that sounded like success stories for the stand-up striking styles I had been studying. As the 90s moved on, there were those outside the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community preaching that if fights weren't over in the first few seconds, they ended up on the ground. Grappling, especially ground grappling, had finally won the mainstream respect it had earned. The challenge matches that had brought in the crowds to the shows promoted by people of my culture and had won respect in Japan over the old-style jiu-jitsu and had brought in students to the Gracie schools was now a worldwide event. Many martial arts incorporated ground fighting when they had ignored it previously. This occurred with eclectic modern systems, traditional systems, and was reintroduced into comprehensive systems that excluded them for reasons not far from those discussed earlier. Now, arguments put forward that strike-based martial artists shouldn't have to train grappling if they got their stand-up art right seemed rather silly. Writer Robert W. Smith had contended that the wrestler would beat the boxer. Jeff Thompson had expressed the extreme importance of understanding how to fight on the ground for self-defense and saw the USC as more vindication of what he had been demonstrating on a smaller scale with his Animal Day pressure testing. Ground fighting was now given a bigger platform to explore and develop. Arguments for aesthetic within the martial arts community were now shown up for the snobbery and logical fallacies that they were. Who cared if it didn't look pretty, the realists argued. Violence isn't pretty. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu rapidly evolved within its traditional gi and no-gi submission grappling areas respectively. Soon it earned an artistic respect never fully appreciated before. Kano had put it that stand-up fighting was far more sophisticated than ground fighting. The former took years to learn, whilst the latter only a matter of months. This was now turned on its head. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts were typically earned after a minimum of 9 years. By comparison, an average Judo black belt was earned after around 4.5 years. Ground grappling became a highly detailed and puzzling range, with new positions popping up on a regular basis. This comes from the fact that ground grapplers typically spar far more frequently than any other type of fighter. Far from being more dangerous than stand-up grappling, many participants have argued that it is the only range that can be sparred for extended periods of time up to competitive intensity with far lower risk of injury than any other full-contact combat sport. As for integrity, for a long time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has been the proud endorser of Kano Jugaro's belief in truth through live practice. Grades were earned when individuals could defeat most other students around the same belt level. The shark is perhaps one of the world's most feared predators. We might place the reason for this at the door of Steven Spielberg's adaptation of Peter Benchley's novel Jaws, which single-handedly invented the summer blockbuster. However, sharks have long been feared, and Benchley derived much of his inspiration for his story from reported incidents in the 20th century alone. In truth, shark attacks remain rare. However, shark hunting has enjoyed so much popularity that many species are now endangered. Likewise, just as ground grappling became very popular, it was only a matter of time before its infallibility was challenged. For decades, ground fighting had been the hidden weapon for the regular challenge fighter who could win unarmed duels with limited rules. The secrecy had been assured by the human desire to not fight in the dirt and a lack of appeal to the spectator. Now it had been hoisted into the public domain like never before. As more people crave realism and extremeness in their entertainment, the ground fighter appeared to take the stage as the champion of truth. However, now the excitement began to level off, it was time to take a sober look. What was the real value of ground fighting? Did all violence usually go to the ground if it wasn't over in the first few seconds? Would the ground fighters continue to dominate the new arena of mixed martial arts? Thanks for listening. Stick around after these messages to hear about what's in store for you in the second part of The Way of the Shark. Thanks for listening to the show. If you're so inclined, there are many ways you can express your support and help keep this podcast going. For example, I've published several books on Amazon. If you'd like a signed copy of any of them, please drop me an email. You can also purchase my online Vagabond Warriors martial arts cross-training courses and the online Animal Instincts Children's Self-Protection Teaching Program. More direct support can be shown through Buy Me a Coffee and my Patreon page. I'm most grateful to all those who have already bought my books and courses and those who continue to kindly donate to the show. As for my services, the heart of all that is CCMA, nowadays I teach private lessons, courses and seminars. These are bespoke services that put you in charge of your martial arts journey. I teach self-protection and martial arts cross-training. You can train with me, one-to-one, or in a small group. I count individual clients, couple clients, parent and child clients, and various other combinations. These can be taught face-to-face or virtually. I also regularly teach clubs, societies and associations nationally and internationally. Please go to clubchimera.com for more details. Please don't forget to subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform you are currently using. If you could leave me a 5-star rating and a review, I would be most grateful. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, X and TikTok. Facebook also has a members group in addition to the main business page, so please send in a request to join in with the training discussions and be a part of the wider CCMA community. I'm also uploading new content to YouTube. There are various shorts, vlogs and full video versions of some of these podcast episodes on there. Again, please subscribe, like, share and leave a comment. All favourable engagement helps keep CCMA moving forward. In the next episode, we examine the latter-day criticism of ground fighting and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. A tidal wave of interest, whipped up by the UFC and the surging rise of MMA, is skillfully surfed by the Gracies, their cousins and associates, ensuring that the art washes up on the shores of martial arts land everywhere in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The non-MMA side of the sport channels through the class system and eventually challenges Taekwondo as the white-collar choice of flushing out effluent pent-up aggression. I hope you're appreciating the aquatic metaphor, because I'm not quite done yet. However, it's far from plain sailing as the UFC is separated from Jorge and Gracie and the sport rapidly changes. The critical eye is cast on the self-defense boasts. Meanwhile, lurking in the depths, we recognise that as fearsome a predator as the shark might be to much of the population that inhabit its oceanic realm, it's not always the apex predator.